Me? Okay. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Heidi Kalu, the Assistant Program Coordinator here at Kelly Writers House. We're very excited tonight to have alumni journalist and best-selling YA author Jessica Goodman joining us virtually for a conversation hosted by Anthony DeCurtis. And I wanted to thank Anthony DeCurtis, who, through the RealArts program, connects his students, the Kelly Writers House, the Penn community, and Philadelphia to people doing amazing things in the arts.
Thank you very much, Heidi. I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. I'm personally delighted to have Jess back, even remotely. Because she's gone on to do such great things, but, she is a former student here and a former student of mine, one that I'm very proud of, and one that I must say I liked a great deal. And so it's just delightful to see her and have her with us. Jess, when she came out of Penn, went to work. I didn't realize she visited my class earlier, and I'd sort of forgotten that you were at HuffPost for 2 years. For some reason, didn't realize it was quite that long. But she was, and then was at Entertainment Weekly, and then went to Cosmopolitan. And while that was going on, she was developing herself as a fiction writer. The book we read in class and the book we'll primarily be talking about tonight is called They'll Never Catch Us. Her first book was called They Wish They Were Us. And she has another book coming out next year called The Counselors. So Jess has been very busy as a fiction writer and very accomplished, very successful. Has a deal with HBO Max, which is exciting also. So, Jess, a pleasure to have you, as I mentioned. And I wonder, if we could persuade you to do some reading from They'll Never Catch Us, and then we can have a chat about it.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much to the Kelly Writers House for having me, and thank you so much to Anthony for hosting and inviting me. And I'm just sad that I can't be with you all today in person, but I'm glad that, virtual events are still a thing and that I can be here. So yeah, I will be reading from They'll Never Catch Us, which, like Anthony said, is my second young adult novel. It's a thriller. And the elevator pitch for this book is that it's about two sisters who are hyper competitive with one another. They're both cross-country runners, and their whole world kind of gets thrown into chaos when a new girl comes to town and threatens to be better than both of them. And then she disappears and they become the main suspects in her disappearance. So I'm going to read from the very beginning, which I think is sometimes a really good place to start. This book is told from both sisters' perspectives. Stella is the older sister and Ellie is the younger sister. And we're going to start reading from Stella's perspective. I hate the way my sister Ellie breathes. She doesn't huff or puff or pant or wheeze. No, Ellie's breath is steady and sure, and it never changes. Not when she accelerates around a particularly angled turn, not even when she sprints the final 100 yards. Her breath is as consistent as the time. I also hate the way Ellie's ponytail never falls out of place, and that she can run in silence without wanting to crush her own brain with her hands. How can my little sister have so many thoughts she actually wants to think? Me, on the other hand, I just want to shut everything out. That's why I run, to get away, to be free. I just want to pump my legs faster than anyone else's, to feel the burn deep within my lungs and all throughout my thighs, to win. It doesn't matter what I'm doing or which course I'm on or anything. What matters is that my brain stops completely. And that I can only get there if everything is aligned, if I ascend planes, beat records, and speed, speed, speed. Only when I'm running can I forget about the little things. How my dark hair is so unruly it can only be tamed by a thick medical-grade elastic. Or that time in the ninth grade, Julia Heller found out I didn't have my period yet and awarded me the nickname sterile. I can forget that my parents are constantly worried about money and the too big house. I can forget that mom is a recovering alcoholic who is always a few sips away from overthrowing the delicate balance we found, and that dad is constantly forcing us to avoid things that might set her off. I can forget why I'm here, how guilt and horror fizzled in my brain when I first heard the sound of bone unlatching. I can even forget the worst thing of all, that Ellie is just as fast as I am, sometimes even faster. Shit, I'm doing it again. This happens every time I get hooked on this train of thought. I start listing all of the things I hate about my sister, and then somewhere along the way, the gears in my brain take a sharp turn, and I'm reminding myself of everything that's wrong with me. The spiral continues until I remember something mom once said. Everyone hates themselves a little. If you get over that, you survive. Sure, she said it when she was drunk and I was 5, but I think it holds up. I repeat that mantra over and over as I push toward the final 800 yards around the track. The sun beats down on my head, and I wonder if my scalp can get sunburnt through my mess of curls. Ellie's fine, silky hair wouldn't protect her against this. Last one, Steckler, you got this. Coach Reynolds calls from the sidelines. Her voice is faint, but I can still hear it. I love being called Steckler. It never happens back in Edgewater because there are always 2 of us. I lean my body into the inner circle of the track as I glide around the last turn. The finish line beckons. My muscles ache. It makes sense, though. I have been running nearly 100 miles a week. That was what was promised at Breakbridge Elite Track and Field Center. Well, that and anger management courses. But still, I've never slept better. Here, my muscles ache and thrum as I pour myself into bed every night. I don't stay awake reciting my stats or obsessing over the scholarship I lost or listening for gasps in the stands as bodies collide. I just sleep. Is this how I'm supposed to feel? Well rested and happy? With only 100 yards to go, I can feel every single lap and every single sprint that have turned my muscles into steel. I've gotten better since June. In the past 8 weeks, I've seen my times go down like crazy. Sure, I also learned some breathing exercises to help clear my mind and ways to keep me from spiraling with frustration. There's no way Ellie will be able to keep up on the cross-country course. A slow smirk crawls across my face as I imagine the fury in my sister's icy blue eyes when I beat her. This last race isn't really a race at all. I'm just killing time before my parents come to get me. This is my final reminder of everything I've accomplished this summer. My first without Ellie, my first away from Edgewater. I've never felt freer than I do here, not while running in the woods or around the lake back home up by the Elle Mountain Resort. I'm finally, desperately alone, and I love it. Here we go. My eyes narrow as the last few yards sneak up on me. I cross them with ease and without ever breaking my pace. I want to keep running. I would too if I didn't know mom and dad were waiting out front, eager to get home to Ellie, the landscapers, and the home office where they sell real estate to gullible yuppies looking for a second home north of Manhattan at the foot of the idyllic Catskill mountain range, or at least where they try to. They used to have such a hard time closing deals back when the cold cases were still fresh and the media called our little town Deadwater. In the span of a year, 3 female cross-country stars went missing. Each one was found on the thorny trail up by Oak Tower, all killed in the same way. Blunt force trauma with no signs of sexual assault. They all fought like hell, and our totally incompetent police department never figured out who did it. But that's in the past now. It's been a decade since anyone went missing. Well, that's if you don't count Shira Tannenbaum, and no one does. Now Edgewater is a place where tri-state tourists come to pick our apples, buy our ceramics, and kayak on our lake. Deadwater is just a myth, something we all lived through but try to forget. Steckler, that was your fastest yet. Coach Reynolds skips up to me and wraps her arm around my shoulder. You're going to crush them all back home this year. She flashes a wide, toothy smile, one that I've grown fond of, even though I'm not usually fond of much. Her gray blonde bun flops on top of her head just above her neon yellow visor, and her cheeks are flushed and round. She reminds me of Grandma Jane. Thanks, I say, barely out of breath. Your folks are here. I figured. You need help gathering your things? Nah, I say, I'm all packed. We walk in silence until the wood cabins come into focus. Behind them are mountains, dozens of gorgeous pointy peaks that ascend into the clouds. They're pretty up here, but better than the ones back home. Grander, closer to the heavens. but I'm itching to get going and move on. I want to forget about what happened last year and focus on the cross-country season ahead, on winning back my college scholarship. That's the only way out of Edgewater. It's not a bad place to live. It's just not the only place.
Thanks, Jess. That was terrific. You know, one of the things I'm going to be following up on, some of the conversation that we had earlier. But one of the things that you said up there, someone in the class asked you if you were a runner. And running, I mean, it's obviously a metaphor in the book, but it's also just the actual activity that these sisters engage in a very determined and committed way. And it's described in very detailed terms. And when someone asked you if you were a runner, you said no, that you weren't. And in fact, you quote unquote hated running. And, had to research all that. And I was wondering, just if you could describe what that process was like. Was that sort of enjoyable, or was that part of the, if there's a sort of drudge part to writing fiction, was that or somewhere in between?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not a runner, but I'm obsessed with the idea of running. I think it is such a great metaphor for so many different things. And specifically in this book, these girls are trying to run away from a lot of things and run towards a lot of things. They're running away from the constraints of being a teenage girl in this very small town where the expectations precede them. And they're running towards what they hope is a better future. They're hoping to use running in order to get there. And running is also a very dangerous thing to do alone as a teenage girl. I think we've seen that all the time in the news. But I think the research for me, I did try to run. I ran like a few times and quite a bit, and I would try to
We're not judging. Yeah.
I would try to access the runner's high that people talk about all the time. Like, my partner loves to run, and it's the way that he releases tension and anxiety. And I just I never got that feeling from running. It just didn't do it for me. But so in terms of research, I read a lot of books by runners, by professional runners, Olympians, athletes. Peter Segal has this great book about what we talk about when we talk about running, that I read. And I read a book about a Penn student who died by suicide and was a runner, called What Made Maddie Run by Kate Fagan. That book was really helpful to me in terms of, getting inside the mind of a student athlete who was struggling with mental health. And that was a great book and a really, helpful research tool for me. And I also, I think when I was writing this book, there was a lot of stories in the news about Olympic runners and female Olympic runners and the challenges they were facing in going professional. Specifically, there's a story about by an athlete named Mary Kane, who was deemed, the fastest girl in the world, or the fastest girl in the country. And she was this incredible high school runner, destined to become, one of the best runners in the world, to win all these medals and everything. And instead of going, instead of running in college, or instead of doing something that, she was interested in, she went to go train with Nike. And when she got to Nike and went pro, everything changed. Her whole career just was destroyed because of the constraints that were put on her by her coaches. They were forcing her to, eat a certain way, weigh a certain amount, train a certain way. And all of it just totally depleted her energy, her body. She was breaking bones within a year or some. Don't fact check me on that specific detail, but she ended up coming forward and saying the way that we treat female athletes, especially young female athletes, is so detrimental to not only our physical health, but also our mental health. And that story really inspired me to write about young female athletes and the challenges that they face that might go unnoticed. And there are a bunch of different stories like that, about the way Nike was treating women who are, female athletes, and specifically female runners who wanted maternity leave policies and wanted to be able to have children in a way that they felt supported in that community, and they didn't. And so all of these events and articles and videos and books really helped me construct what it's like to be an athlete at the highest level, or like hope to be an athlete at the highest level. I just think it's such high stakes, and I really wanted to capture that.
In addition, the two runners, I mean, as you mentioned, are sisters. And, you mentioned earlier that you do have a sister. I was wondering, what you felt there was about, the relationship between sisters that, I mean, clearly, all family relationships are deep and complicated. But I wondered, what there was about the relationship between sisters that you felt, was an area that you would like to explore, and that, kind of, created a field where, you can put all the issues into play that you put into play in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like you said, family relationships are so complex, and there's so much there in every family relationship. But having been, I am a sister, and I love my sister deeply. And I think, when I think about like what it means to be a sibling, especially like a sibling in a 2-child household, it's like, you are the only other person, or like that your sibling is like the only other person in the world who like knows exactly what your childhood was like, most likely, and knows exactly like how you became to be the person you are. And that person becomes almost like, a secret keeper, a treasure chest. Like they hold all of these things outside of you. And they're also like, especially when you are girls, I think, or of the same gender, and are really close in age, like people in the world can't help but compare you. Like it's just how it is. My sister and I went to the same high school, we're only 18 months apart, went to the same high school, did all the same sports, had all the same teachers. We both went to Penn. We were both in a sorority together. We both moved to New York after. And how can people not compare us? Like, it's just human nature. And I think that like, having that relationship and having to kind of work with people's expectations of you based on your sibling is such an interesting like concept and like mind hurdle. She and I talk about this like a lot. And I think when you're also a teenager, like that comparison is heightened, and just that your feelings about it are also heightened because you're a teenager and everything is like really, really hard and dramatic. And that's a good thing. But I really wanted to write about two sisters who feel like they're really different. Like they think they're really different, and readers think that they're really different too. Like, they have different personalities, and they feel far apart from one another. They don't feel like they're close, and they don't feel like they have a solid relationship. But by the end of the book, like I think they've really found what their relationship is. And it might not look like the very cookie cutter traditional, like sisters love each other forever relationship, but it's much deeper and stronger, and has, a lot of meaning. And there's like a really strong foundation there for them to build on. And I think that that's, how most relationships are. And I get like bothered when I see like hunky-dory sister relationships or even sibling relationships in pop culture, because I'm like, that's not how it is. Like we fight, and that's a good thing. And these girls fight a lot in this book. And that was also really like, I really wanted to show that. I thought that was an important thing, an important dynamic to portray, because people fight and people make up all the time, and like showing healthy fighting and showing healthy makeups, like that's great. I think it's really important. And that's really what I was hoping to do.
Well, there was a really interesting kind of emotional dance that they go through that actually at points was extremely moving, because they are competitive. They are both runners. They're running on the same team, and the younger sister is coming on, and the older sister is kind of established but also a little shaky, and they're different personalities also. But there are these moments, partly having to do with, their mother's alcoholism, and partly having to do with, kind of other stresses in their relationship, where, the younger sister, likes to get into bed with her older sister, and, and the older sister will like soothe her and just say, like it's you and me forever. And, it's incredible capturing the degree to which there is that deep emotional connection, which is familial and is in some way unbreakable, with all these things going on around it that threaten to break it. I felt like, I mean, I don't know if, if you experience that as hard to dramatize, but it seemed to me to be really subtle and to come across really well.
Well, thank you. That's really kind. And I this was definitely like the hardest book I've written, and one of the hardest, like, anything I've written. I think because I wanted to take such care with this relationship because it felt so important to me. And I was, revising it during the pandemic, which was like a whole other, like, the early pandemic, which was like a whole other mishigas. But, I think I was very intentional with the way that I wrote them and with the way that their relationship kind of ebbs and flows between love and hate. And sometimes they can't tell the difference between what is loyalty and what is betrayal, because sometimes those things look kind of similar, especially in like competitive running. And I think that's also why I wanted to tell this book in two different perspectives, because I wanted readers to see the other sister from the other one's perspective. Because I think if you were in one sister's head the whole time, you would not really like get the full 360 understanding of their relationship, and reading them talking about and thinking about the other sister was an important aspect of this book. And I had never written, anything in two different perspectives before. And I think this was like a real challenge for me, because I really wanted their voices to feel pretty different. But I'm really glad that I took on the challenge, because I think it adds a real layer of depth to the book that you wouldn't get if you were just reading it from one perspective.
Yeah, it definitely provides texture. And in fact, I wanted to ask about that. Because it's the sections don't exactly alternate, but there's a balance between this chapter is from Stella's perspective, the other chapter is from Ellie's perspective, and I was wondering if that was initially in your mind as the technique that you wanted to use, or is that something that you gravitated toward as you were writing and thought, in order to really make this work, I'm going to have to try this, was it just part of your original structure?
Yeah, I think it was always part of the original structure. I think because it was a sister's book, I was just like, this is the way that this has to go. And now I've like kind of gotten the bug for writing in multiple perspectives. Like I'm working on another book idea right now, and I'm like, oh, this would be fun with like 4 perspectives. We'll see if I actually make that happen. But I think with this one, it was just always baked into the nature of the book, like how best to tell this story. And it was always with these two girls at the center, always hearing from both of them.
One of the things, that I mentioned earlier in introducing you is, you started out writing nonfiction and you continue to write nonfiction. But I was wondering what drew you to make this transition, and also like if you could do a comparison of what some of the issues are in terms of the different types of writing, writing a profile or a feature, and and making it all up, writing a novel.
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, like I'm a reader. Like I absolutely love to read. I always have been. I like consume and devour books like as much as I can. Fiction mostly, like some nonfiction books as well. But I just love novels and love fiction. And I think for me, like, especially, after being at Penn and taking so many amazing nonfiction classes and running 34th Street when I was there, like I didn't know any authors like who wrote fiction as a job and like made that their life, the way that they lived throughout the world. I didn't know that kind of lifestyle. But I did meet a lot of amazing journalists and like people who wrote nonfiction for a living, like yourself included. And I think for me, like when I graduated Penn, writing nonfiction and like becoming a journalist seemed like an incredible career move where you got to write full time. And it was for me, like when I was doing that full time, like it absolutely was. And it was my dream at the time. But I think as I learned more about the publishing industry and met more people who were also writing fiction, I started to understand that like you could do both and that you could, have like you could fulfill yourself creatively in a lot of different ways. And I think that when journalism started becoming, my full-time job, and I was like understanding a little bit more about what that meant in terms of working in newsrooms and the kinds of constraints you might feel, and also the the work-life balance. Like I didn't find that I was like as creatively fulfilled as I had hoped to be. And writing fiction really is like breaks open my creative heart in the best of ways and really makes me like when I'm writing and revising a book, like I feel like I'm in exactly the place that I'm supposed to be, which is an incredible feeling. And when I'm working on nonfiction, I feel like I've been trained to do this and I know how to do this. And when I get it right, it feels great. But it's a different kind. It feels more like work than my fiction, which is interesting. And like my partner is a journalist as well. And I think like he gets extremely creatively fulfilled from his journalism. And so it's like different strokes for everybody. But I will say that being able to do both is like, it's the greatest blessing. Like, it's so fun. And I think when I feel like I just can't look at a book, one of my manuscripts anymore, like I just start pitching ideas and like, trying to get like quick hits in digital outlets or newspapers or something like that. But I do think that working in fiction has changed the way that I look at my journalism in terms of like structure. We were talking about this a little bit before, but I think now, like having worked on a project that's like, 90,000 words, like I think I have a much better understanding of how I want to structure like a 1,000 or 2,000 word piece. Whereas like maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I think I would have really struggled about like how to structure something and like how to, get even like a character arc in there in the same way that I now feel like pretty equipped to do.
You mentioned that, your first book, They Wish They Were Us, began sort of here at Penn, actually, when you were in a young adult fiction writing class. And, some years later, you decided at the suggestion of a friend, I think you mentioned that, you wanted to go back and revisit that. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, just some of the pragmatics of that process, going back and revisiting it, some of your motivations for doing that, and then the things of, how did you get an agent, and how did you get the book to a publisher, and those kinds of things. Wonder if you can walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, it was my dear friend Elle Jaffe who also took your class, and I think has spoken to your class. I think I was complaining to her and I was like, oh my God, I'm so stressed out at work. I'm not feeling creatively fulfilled. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, I feel very stuck. And she is a big reader too. And she had read my 50 pages that I had written in this YA fiction writing class with Melissa Jensen, who's a wonderful professor. And she was like, you had so much fun writing that. Have you ever thought about like pulling it back out and like trying to, whip it into shape? And I was like, that's a really good idea. So I dug out, the draft, and it was absolutely terrible. And I basically spent maybe 2 years, like 2.5 years, thinking about it and writing. And I basically took that draft and those 50 pages and just tried to like start over with like very similar characters, very similar idea, same setting, and just like rewrote. And I must have written like 12 or 13 drafts, just like on my own, trying to figure out like, what is a book? Like, what are acts? Like, how do you put something together? And during that time, I was also reading a lot of current YA fiction, especially like YA thrillers or like YA prep school books, because that book is a prep school murder mystery, just to see like what the market was like. And I kind of like stopped reading YA for a while. And so I wanted to see like, what are people reading? What are people writing? Like what's really popular right now? Is my voice still, you know, in this space? Like, is this going to work? And so it was a lot of just like, you know, carving out time because I really wanted it to happen. And I like, once I got in pretty deep, maybe a year in, I was like, I have to finish this because if I don't, like, I'll feel like all this time has been wasted. And so it was almost like sheer fear that pushed me through, because it's really challenging to write something on spec, which basically just means like no one's going to pay you for it. And so you really have to like believe in yourself and have this like kind of false sense of bravado or confidence that you can do it. And that's what I did. I just told myself I could do it. And I would send like portions to friends and be like, can you just tell me like if this is really terrible and I should stop? And after getting, you know, some feedback that was like, no, keep going, you know, I was like, okay, I'll keep going. So yeah, about maybe like 2.5 years after trying to start working on it in earnest, I wanted to get an agent. And that's the best way to sell a book to a publisher if you want to go a traditional publishing route. And so I basically just was Googling for like 6 months, like, how do you find an agent? Like, what are YA agents? Like, how does this happen? And I think the best like tips I can give about that are look for books that are similar to your own. Like every agent and every publisher is going to want what they call a comp, which basically means like a title that's comparable to yours. So like They'll Never Catch Us is like very comparable to One of Us is Lying, which is like a super popular, very, you know, beloved YA murder mystery. And so, you know, I would probably, if I were like looking right now, I would probably want to look for whoever reps Karen McManus, who wrote that book. Like you want to look for agents who represent books that are like yours. The best way to find out an author's agent is, I think, to go old school and like look in the back of a book and like in the acknowledgement section. And the author will usually thank their agent like first or second. And that's a great way just to find them. There are a couple of databases you can use too, like Publishers Marketplace is a good one, though you have to pay for it. But it's good if you're like querying, which just means pitching. And so basically, like I made a list of maybe like 30 agents that I thought would be a good fit. Some I found on Twitter, some I found through friends of friends who worked in publishing, some, you know, back of the book kind of thing. And the agent that I was, you know, really excited about, who ended up being my agent, she had at the time I was working at Cosmopolitan, and she represents an author who also was an editor at Cosmopolitan and then started writing fiction and is now like a super successful, you know, adult author of murder mysteries. And so I was like, okay, mine's YA, but like, you know, she seems to like working with magazine editors. Maybe she'll like this one. And so she and I started working together in May of 2018.
Well, just let me interrupt for a second. You sent her the manuscript?
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah. So basically like what you do is like you pitch all these agents, you kind of send out cold pitches, you research every agent, and they say on their website, like how they like to be pitched, you know, via email or snail mail. It's all via email. And they'll say, you know, send me 10 pages, send me 50 pages, just send me a pitch. They'll be very explicit about what they want. And then if they want to see more, they'll ask you for the full manuscript. So before you pitch agents, you really do need to have like a full manuscript done. So she asked for my full manuscript. She read the full book. And then in May 2018, she called me and she was like, I'd love to work with you. And I was like, great. When do we go to publishers? And she was like, not yet. And so basically from May till October of 2018, so that's like about 6 months, we edited the book like 2 full times. And so she, you know, has an editorial mind. She would make suggestions about what needed to be done. And we worked together 6 months polishing the book, changing it quite a bit. And by that time, she thought it was ready to go out to publishers. And so then what a good agent will do is send your book around to a bunch of publishers who they think will like it and will you know, bid on it or buy it. And then you kind of just wait and you hope that one of them wants to buy it. And luckily we did. We had a couple people who were interested in. And so my book was sold to my publisher in November, like a month later, November 2019. And then the book came out in August 2020. So, almost 18 months later. So it's a really long process. And it's hard work, and you really have to believe in yourself and think you can do it, because there's so much lag time, and there's so many moments of self-doubt, I think. But after I sold to the publisher, it was a great feeling. And, my editor and I worked together polishing the book for another year before it, went to print, basically. So that is the long, long process of publishing They Wish They Were Us.
Well, then it turned out to be quite successful. I mean, were you obviously, you believed in it, as you just said, but were you surprised that it did as well as it did?
Was I surprised? I had very high expectations for myself, just because that's like how I'm built. I went to Penn, where I think a lot of people have, are quite ambitious. And so I was really hopeful. And I think, my publisher gave me a lot of support, which I was really grateful for. And they put a lot of, marketing behind the book, which was really exciting. And like you mentioned, we have like the book is in development at HBO Max to be a TV series. And that happened like before the book came out. So having that in our back pocket as we were going to publishing was like a huge deal. So that was really exciting. And I think just kind of like gave it some momentum moving forward.
And now you have a book that will be coming out next year. Was that postponed because of the pandemic, or was that just when it was scheduled to come out, or?
That's just when it was scheduled to come out. They Wish They Were Us was August 2020. They'll Never Catch Us was July 2021. Is that what year we're in? Yeah. And then I'm like, what is time?
Yeah, exactly.
And then, and my third book, The Counselors, will be out in May 2022. So a book a year is like quite a lot, I think. But it is somewhat common in the young adult world. I think young adult authors are trying to push out books like that. So this one will come out next summer, and then we'll see.
And how does you mentioned doing pardon me, you mentioned doing some freelancing, and how does nonfiction writing sort of fit into your world now? Like, how do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty, let's see. I'm having a lot of fun with the nonfiction that I am working on, because I'm choosing to do it. And I'm choosing, where to write and who to write for, and the different, I'm just choosing what I want to do. And I think when you're on staff at a publication, you have a lot less choice and a lot less flexibility, and you often have to write whatever needs to be written that day, that you're in, the section that you're on, or what your editor needs, or anything like that. And so right now I am taking on a bunch of interesting, reported pieces, or interesting to me reported pieces, and pitching stuff that is, that feels right to me. Like, for example, I actually was assigned a story at Bustle, which is a women's outlet, about how authors interact with Goodreads, which is a digital review site, and how authors interact with just online reviews in general, now that basically anyone with Wi-Fi can leave a review that might affect who buys your book. And so that was a really interesting piece that I got to speak to a bunch of authors I admire for. I got to speak to a bunch of authors for that piece. And that's a nice moment where both of my worlds kind of blend together. And so that's been fun, but I'm also doing a lot of work for Cosmo still, which is really great, because I loved working with them. And interviewing celebrities for various websites and magazines. What else am I doing? Some personal essays here and there. And I get to be a little choosy, which is fun. And I'm kind of at the point where I can pitch stuff, and if it doesn't get accepted, then I'm able to move on and just say okay, I have my book work going on, so it's not that big of a deal. And if something does get accepted, it's, a really exciting moment, and I'm excited to write it. But it feels a little bit less like I have all my eggs in one basket, which I think is something that a lot of writers struggle with. You want to, if you're a freelancer, I think you want to keep your portfolio like diversified a little bit, so you can kind of like shop things around. And if like, your nonfiction's a little slow, you can work on your fiction. And if both of those are slow, you can try to have like a copywriting gig in there that like doesn't have your byline, but like, you'll get paid for. So it's kind of like an ever moving Venn diagram of like, when am I getting paid? Am I creatively fulfilled? Like, what's happening here?
Yeah, I always, in terms of my own work, I always like to think of I always thought of the fun, money, prestige index. Like you want,
Yes.
some combination. Occasionally the three, the cherries come up in every window. Often you get one or two anyway. But
yes, I love that.
Yeah, just kind of keep it moving. Well, one final thing, and then maybe we'll take some questions from our audience. But could you talk about how you come up with ideas for books?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, it's really hard. I guess the good thing with books though is that like I need like one, you just need like one idea. I think for me, what usually happens, and I say usually, like I've only been doing this for a couple years now, but like what usually happens is that like while I'm in the middle of writing something that like I'm loving and on contract for, I get an idea for something that like I don't have time to write. It seems really exciting to me, and I kind of just like file it away and put it in a notes app and then like think about it, over and over and over again. And so like while I was finishing up They'll Never Catch Us, I got the idea for my third book, which is like a summer camp murder mystery. Because it was during the pandemic and I was just like really missing like being outside. Like I was really missing just like friendship in summer and like summer camp vibes. And that's when it came to me. But coming up with ideas is really, really hard. And I think sometimes you just like, you think as an artist that like ideas are just going to like pop in your head and you're going to be like, oh, perfect. Like, look at me, I have an idea. And I think a lot of times you have to be like really intentional about it. And so for me, like I've been trying to figure out like, what is the idea that I want to be my adult debut book? Like, what do I want that book to be? Like, who is it about? What is it? Like, I don't even know. And I've kind of like, for a while, I was just like waiting for the idea to hit me. I was like, come on, like smack me in the face with my idea. Wasn't happening. And this is like so funny, but I was getting like a facial, like a beauty treatment. And I was like, okay, this is like, if you've ever had a facial, they basically like steam water on your face or like they put steam on your face and like leave you alone for 20 minutes. And I was like, okay, I like really can't do anything. Like, let's try to think about like, what do I want to write? Like and I tried to like, just put myself in like this exercise where I was like, what age group am I writing about? Like, who is my main character? Like, what's an interesting relationship or setting or like anything? Like, just think of like anything that's interesting to you right now that you think could like have some teeth. And I walked out of that appointment with like what I thought was like the beginnings of an idea that I'm like trying to nurture now and see if it's going to grow into something. But I think you have to be gentle with yourself and like know that it's okay if you don't have like the most brilliant idea right away. Because it's hard. And also like the first idea that you have isn't going to be what the final project is, like the book, They'll Never Catch Us was like nothing like this one. It was just like a baby of an idea. It grows and grows and grows. And I think you have to be flexible and let it take shape as you work on it.
Well, great. Let's see. Do we have any questions from the audience?
So our YouTube chat is a little quiet right now, but I actually did have a question myself, if I could ask.
Oh, please,
one. Yeah.
by all means.
One thing that struck me. Oh, sorry, this is my parking alarm. One thing that struck me when you're reading was the tone of the piece. And I know like YA writing, right, is its own genre, and it's not children's writing, right, and it's not like full blown, like sort of like an adult novel. How difficult is it for you to like balance that tone when you're writing? Are you like conscious of it while you're doing it, or do you have to go back and revise it like a million times? Does your editor get on your case about it? I was just curious like how you approach that.
That's a great question. Yeah, I think like my natural fiction voice, at least for these projects, is definitely like in the realm of fiction. I mean, of young adult. it comes quite naturally to me, but I do find myself having to like tweak certain things that definitely age me. Like, I think I had my characters like smoking cigarettes at one point, and my agent was like, all teens vape, like they don't smoke cigarettes, you know? So I had to, like, little things like that, are kind of funny. But I try to really like not speak like a teenager. Like I try to just speak like how these kids would talk, like just how, like, okay, so it's interesting because like I don't want my characters to like actually speak like a teenager. I want them to speak like, you know, literary characters in a lot of ways. And so finding that balance is tricky, because you want it to feel authentic and real, but you don't want it to, you know, just like kind of fall flat on the page. But I will say that like one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was to like not use any modern day slang, really, unless it's like absolutely in the vernacular, because there's so much, especially with like the way we talk about like apps or social media, like there's so much of that stuff that makes books feel really dated and, you know, really set in a specific time frame. And if you want your books to feel timeless, then it's, you know, I think it's like it's a better tactic to like avoid all that stuff and kind of let the books exist like wherever they might.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, one of the things that I was thinking about, you know, after class, you know, you mentioned, you know, your own experiences as a young girl and a young woman, and not necessarily feeling like that voice was ever taken seriously. And I wonder if there was more that you could say about that, or just since, you know, we have another audience, you know, if you mind going back over that, because I thought it was really pretty intriguing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that the world, but I think that like society kind of looks down on teenage girls. Like, I think everything that you see people make fun of all the time, like, you know, boy bands or like fandoms or like, you know, fan fiction is often like stuff that is it's for teenage girls, and it's like what excites them, and the world kind of like dismisses teenage girls and their and the things that make them happy or excited or emotional as like dumb and not serious. And I especially felt that as a teenager, but also working at Cosmo, which is obviously a women's magazine for young women. And I cannot tell you like how many times I was like talked down to at various press events because I came from like a women's magazine, or because I came from Cosmo specifically, which people think is like only about sex, but really covers basically everything. But because we were a magazine for young women, we were treated differently than even like Elle or Vogue, which like, you know, are for adult women. And so I think like, I just am so like, I've always been so fed up with that, but like, especially writing for teenage girls, like I've had so many people like give me backhanded compliments, like, oh, your books are so good for like, you know, being about teenage girls, or like, they're so good for being like YA fiction, you know? And it's like, all right, like for sure. Like you can think however you want, you know? And it doesn't even faze me anymore, but if I can like do anything, like I'm now in a position of power where I can like write books that take teenage girls, their fears, their worries, their, you know, excitement. Like if I can do anything that takes that stuff seriously, that makes me happy, because I like hope that teenage girls do feel like the world takes them seriously. And I think that they do more now than when I was growing up. Even if like people can't understand that like women's magazines can do more than one thing. But I think it's just important. And I think it's like, I don't know. I think there's so much in this world for teenage boys, and there's so much in this world for, you know, men, obviously. And if like books for teenage girls can like make them feel seen in a way that they haven't before, like that's a wonderful thing. So that's why I feel so strongly about this. But I also just think that it's fun to be in the voice of a teenage girl, because teenage girls feel things so deeply and so intensely and so unlike any other like time in their lives. And I think in a different way than boys do. And I just like really love revisiting that world and that headspace. And then also like being an adult and not really having to feel those feelings anymore. 'Cause it's intense.
Emotion
It's
recollected
intense.
in tranquility.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is the end of the world when you're a teenager, boy or girl, or, any person like would feel like that's what you feel like as a teenager. And I love to capture that because the stakes feel so high.
Um, Zach, do we have any questions emerge?
No, we do not.
Well, we are satisfying our audience perfectly in that case.
All good.
All right,
All good.
Well, why don't you talk a little bit about, obviously you have a book coming out in the spring. I don't know how much further down the line you're looking than that, but about your sort of aspirations as a writer. It must be, it must feel somewhat new to, be recognized as a fiction writer and, getting the attention that you're getting and having the experiences that you're having. But what do you think about when you think about, continuing that aspect of your career?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I definitely want to continue writing young adult fiction. I think it's a great place for me. I have a lot of fun with it. And I think I have more to say. I also definitely want to write adult fiction, like I mentioned. And I hopefully have an idea for that moving forward. But I'm also interested in playing in different mediums, whether it's like getting into screenwriting or working on TV or movies. I think that would be really fun. It's something that I'm definitely interested in and have been like talking to people about. And I hope to always keep a foot planted in the nonfiction world too. Like, I think that is the industry that made me and where I feel like I have a lot of experience and a lot more work to do. And so I hope to always, be reporting and writing in some sort of way. And I do love the moments where being an author and being a reporter or being an editor kind of come together. It really feels like those were the moments that I was made for, and that where I can really see like all of my different experiences come out and help me. But yeah, I mean, honestly, like as long as I can make a living being a writer, like that's a huge success in my book. And that was the goal, and that has been reached. And as long as I can keep doing that, like I think I'll be really happy.
One of the other things I wanted to ask you about, we briefly mentioned, your HBO Max deal, and you spoke about it a little bit upstairs, but I wonder if you could say some more about, just maybe how that came about and, how it looks to you and feels to you and, the kind of excitement surrounding it and, your degree of involvement or lack of involvement in it and, just the whole bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So They Wish They Were Us is currently in development at HBO Max to be a limited series, which is very exciting, obviously. And that basically happened because this actor, Sydney Sweeney, who you may have seen in Euphoria or The White Lotus, she and I got connected in 2019 before the book even came out because she had read a draft of the book someone had given to her, and she really liked it. And she wanted to start a production company. And as a young female star, she wanted to start her company with by optioning a young adult book that she could star in. She liked mine, which was amazing. So we met, and she kind of like pitched me her idea for what the limited series would be. I loved it. It was a great idea. And then she basically took it out to producers that she had worked with on Sharp Objects and The Handmaid's Tale and, Euphoria and all of these incredible producers. And she got the team behind Sharp Objects and Big Little Lies on board. And so they became the executive producers alongside her and myself. And they basically brought in a filmmaker who's like writing it and going to, direct the first few episodes. And then Sydney, this amazing actress, is like best friends with Halsey, who is an incredible pop star. And Halsey wanted to be in it too, which is really cool. And so Sydney kind of put together this like all-star dream team. They came up with this pitch and they pitched it to HBO Max. And earlier this year, I think in February, HBO Max said like, okay, let's do it. Let's develop this. And basically what that means is that they, pay someone to write a couple of episodes, and then they look at the scripts and they decide if they want to move forward with the project or if they don't want to move forward with the project. So basically, this is where we are right now. And I am an executive producer on the project, but I haven't been really involved like on a day-to-day basis at all. But they'll check in every now and then and be like, oh, like read this script, like here's what's going on, like this is what's happening. So it's super exciting, and it's just always this like wonderful little back burner thing that I obviously hope happens because I think it would be so cool. And I think there are a lot of really great adaptations out there right now. So I hope They Wish They Were Us can be another one.
And you're thinking about, sort of getting involved on that end yourself, you mentioned.
Yeah. I think the dream for me would be to adapt my own stuff and try to figure out how to do that, whether for TV or movies. But I'd love to be the person that like takes my books to the next level. And so I'm like trying to learn how to do that. So every day is a new adventure.
Well, speaking of new adventures, I feel like in closing here, I should mention that Jess is in fact getting married on Saturday, and
Yes.
in the midst of everything that is all likely involved in that. She took the time to be with us today, which I'm delighted about, and want to thank her and then wish her the most sincere congratulations, and hopefully we'll have you back in person before too long.
Yes, I'm so sorry I couldn't be there in person today, but I'm glad that this worked out, and hopefully next time I will definitely be there with bells and whistles on.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Jess. It was a real
Thank you.
pleasure. Bye-bye.
Yeah, back at you. Bye.